I would like to thank AIJ Minnesota for partnering with us for tonight's event, and in particular Joe Isaac for bringing this event to my attention and to the attention of AIJ Minnesota, and for wrangling all the logistics involved in both the presentations but also the display, which will be ongoing after the presentation this evening in the Bazinet Garden lobby just outside the cinema, which is the Threadless Loves Democracy, which was sponsored by Sappi Fine Paper, Threadless, Rock the Vote, and Jones Soda. And of course, our thanks to Saul Sender, Scott Thomas, and Paul Schmelzer for their presentations this evening. And Paul will introduce both Scott and Saul, and so I will introduce Paul. And I should note that this is being webcast, and the presentation will be available on the Walker channel as well as on YouTube and iTunes U. Paul Schmelzer is the editor of the Minnesota Independent, which is minnesotaindependent.com, a nonprofit web-based news site operated by the Center for Independent Media. Schmelzer has written for Alternet, Cabinet Magazine, City Pages, Ode, The Progressive, Raw Vision, The Utne Reader, and other journals. His interviews with activist Winona LaDuke, architect Cameron Sinclair, and artist Rick Gritt will appear in the book Land, Art, A Cultural Ecology Reader. Paul has been past editor at Adbusters, and of course here at the Walker Art Center, Paul was the managing editor of the Walker magazine. He's won a Frank Primek Award for Public Affairs Journalism in 2007 and a Minnesota Society of Professional Journalists Awards in 2006 and 2007. And I believe that this is the first time that a web-based journalist has won those awards, so congratulations on that. It's quite a feat, especially in this day and age. Paul also publishes this blog, iTeeth, which is iteeth@blogspot.com, and recently was a guest blogger about art and politics for Art21. Please help me welcome Paul Schmelzer.
I don't think I've ever seen my name so large on a screen anywhere. Thanks, Andrew, and good evening, everybody. So, here's the clicker. There's my name big. Let's see how it works. There we go. This is me. No, this is not me. So we all know the story by now. He was relatively new to politics, having spent a lot of time with community organizers and academics. He didn't look like many of the other candidates that were out there. And thanks to a tenacious ground team, impassioned stump speeches, and somewhat unorthodox campaign, he pulled it off. I'm talking, of course, about the late Paul Wellstone, a short, frizzy-haired, Jewish college professor who toured the state of Minnesota in a green bus. He seemed like a long shot to become a U.S. Senator in Minnesota, but he did, and he became so beloved here that more than 5.5 years after his death, his grass-green bumper stickers can still be spotted across Minnesota. I bring up Paul Wellstone for two reasons, as a parallel to that other left-leaning populist who's come from behind campaign we're addressing tonight, and as a way of introducing the local into the discussion. First, the parallels. Wellstone's campaign graphics, while iconic, weren't nearly as sophisticated or as expensive as Obama's, but the trademark green and the ever-present Wellstone exclamation point stood in stark contrast to the expected vocabulary of traditional American political graphics. Eagles, unfurling flags, stars, you know the routine. And that bus, while it's a symbol of the Minnesota everyman that Paul Wellstone was, it's every bit an astute choice in terms of symbolism as Barack Obama's mastery of political stagecraft. The bigger similarity, though, is how fiercely embraced both designs were. There are plenty of reasons for this that transcend design, but since that's our topic, let me go on. I've seen, and I imagine you've seen this too, plenty of hand-painted Wellstone banners, sun-faded yard signs still out 5.5 years later, tattered bumper stickers on old Volvos, new bumper stickers on old Volvos. I'm not sure how that works, but I've seen that a few times. And over the past 2 years, I've seen that same kind of enthusiasm and devotion for Obama and the graphic design campaign that our two guests here today came up with, even down to the Volvo. Throughout the 2008 campaign, the Obama brand, developed by our guests tonight, has ended up just about everywhere. This is going to be slightly redundant with what these guys are going to show, but I want to kind of give you the context locally for this, as well as kind of look at some of the other unorthodox campaigns that we all know and love right here. This brand has appeared on Volvos in sophisticated graffiti art, maybe not quite as sophisticated, but heartfelt community murals on a variety of baked goods, Halloween pumpkins, and in case you can't tell what it is, down there on your lower right is something called a felt ball of hope, which is made, according to Flickr user Felt Cafe, through processes called wet felting and needle felting. And let me tell you that that is not the only example on the interwebs of felt Obama logos, surprisingly. Let's see, what else do we have? Hacked street signs. On signs by possibly Dada-inspired culture jammers. This is a screen grab from a post-debate analysis on MSNBC last October. And as Miss Andrea Mitchell was doing her pundit thing, students showed up behind her toting modified Obama signs that showed the face of Kung Fu master Jackie Chan with the modified Obama logo, Chan is all we need, or Chan we need, right. It was a twist on change we need. Finally, the Obama mark also appeared on light-up LED bicycle spokes, which shouldn't be confused with the very similar-looking Yetis for Change t-shirts sold online. I gotta go back. I love that. Now back to Paul Wellstone. The second reason why I bring this up is to situate tonight's conversation within a local framework. Minnesota politics, for whatever reason, has often veered wildly from the norm. And the visual communications have, in varying degrees, followed suit. When Jesse Ventura shocked the world, as he put it, by winning the governor's office, he did so with neon green campaign graphics and 30-second TV spots that alternately positioned the candidate on two ends of an unlikely spectrum, as a thinker on par with Rodin's famed sculpture, and as a plastic children's toy. Now, I talked to one of the creators of this commercial from 1998, and this action figure was actually made by fusing it was a custom-made thing. It was made by fusing the head of a G.I. Joe character. I'm told it was the baldest character named General Omar Bradley, and apparently his hair on the side had to be kind of painted off, and the body is Batman's. And of course, right now we're waiting to see if former Saturday Night Live, whoops, sorry, that's going too far ahead. That's not him. Now we're waiting to see if Al Franken, former SNL writer and comedian, is going to be seated to the remaining Minnesota Senate seat. So yeah, we have this history. But not all of our candidates are Hollywood types and Northfield academes, yet we've still fielded our share of less quirky but still not quite traditional color schemes. Like, there you got it, Hubert Humphrey's regionally appropriate hunting orange signage, which ultimately failed to help him beat out JFK to become the 1960 Democratic nominee. Of course, as Minnesotans know, he did go on in '65 to become the vice president under Lyndon B. Johnson, so maybe it had a little residual effect. What else we got here? Minnesota's Eugene McCarthy ran for the Democratic nomination for president in 1968 with a decidedly unflag-like color scheme, which I would like to believe is a subtle nod to the main plank of his platform, which was opposition to the escalation of the war in Vietnam. And of course, a Minnesotan, Winona LaDuke, ran with Ralph Nader on the Green Party ticket in 2000. Other candidates, both from here and elsewhere, have tried experimenting with typefaces. And these are the ones, I'm still kind of showing you the ones that deviate a little bit from the norm. Logo types. I thought maybe this was Robert Byrd's age at the time, but I think it was the year 76. The late Robert Byrd, is that correct? And also experimenting with puns. I'm going to let you read this one for a while, and if you can't see it, the bottom guy was a guy named Hartkey who ran in '72 using line art that showed a heart key. But these examples are outnumbered by the majority of graphics put forth by more mainstream, or as pundits like to say, viable candidates, who have largely stuck with patriotic motifs of stars and bars and red, white, and blue hues. There we go, there's one. Regardless of the decade, this vocabulary repeatedly popped up, although occasionally there was a little more interesting things going on with it. But sometimes parties didn't even seem to try to shake things up at all. Check this out. 1960, Kennedy Johnson, exact same typeface for Johnson Humphrey in '64. '68, Humphrey Muskie. It's like they couldn't afford to get a new designer each time. And not surprisingly, the trend towards patriotic code continued, with stars dominating in the 80s, the 90s, and even today. The star, actually a Zap dingbat, featured prominently in John McCain's campaign identity. First launched in austere black, the logo was later converted to a palette of yellow, blue, and white that you might recognize better. But when I first saw it, this black and white version reminded me of a luxury car ad, targeting people far outside my own demographic. The star and these wings or whatever they are always reminded me of Lincoln Continental emblem. And I'm starting to think that maybe I wasn't the first person to pick up on that. But as designer Stephen Heller pointed out last year, McCain's identity draws from other sources. The Typeface Optima. Now, I'm a writer and an editor, so I was telling these guys that I was having typographic trepidation here, that you're going to look at the typefaces I chose and my design. But I'm just, I don't mean to school anybody on Optima, but Optima is the same typeface that McCain used, and it also appears on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington by sculptor Maya Lin. And it's also one that was used in some Roman monuments, so it has a very militaristic kind of history. And design curator Alan Lupton wrote that McCain's image is inexorably tied to his status as a war hero. This is his story, and Optima helps him tell it. But using a typeface often carved into stone poses some issues. Team McCain had to make some needed adjustments to create a more approachable image. When the campaign launched the website, which, similar to Obama's, had a lot of the Web 2.0 social media gizmos that are kind of prerequisites in modern campaigning, it started out with a stark black and white palette. Later, we get color type, pictures of smiling John McCain, Smiling John, as I like to call him. And then eventually, after Sarah Palin was named the running mate right here in sunny Minneapolis, St. Paul last September, the site had all but done away with the black. This campaign's graphic identity may appeal to a demographic McCain was seeking, but as we now know it, the candidate it stood for, I'm sorry, I'm reading wrong. The candidate's graphic identity may appeal to a demographic McCain was seeking, but apparently it was no match for that of Barack Obama, whose logo and graphic identity, as we'll soon find out from our guest tonight, was much more adaptable and, dare I say, hopeful. So enough of my spiel. Now I'd like to introduce the men behind it all and let them give their spiels, because they know what they're talking about. As founder and principal of Sender LLC, Saul Sender spearheaded the logo development for Barack Obama's historic campaign. Now a strategist with VSA Partners, Saul's career as a designer and a strategist has been widely recognized, including by the Webby Awards, Communication Arts, How Magazine, and many others. He also teaches design at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where he studied, I learned tonight, correct? And he writes about design education and design history, a topic he's now inextricably part of. Scott Thomas, AKA Simple Scott, started practicing design in London in 2002 before moving to Chicago, where he began focusing on user experience design informed by immersive user research. In 2006, he and 5 others founded the Post Family, which is a design collective that utilizes media from silkscreen to letterpress, illustration to blogging, in an effort to, quote, get back to the hand. In 2007, he was invited to join the new media team at Obama for America, and ended up running the whole show as design director of the historic campaign. So welcome to them.
Thanks a lot, and pleasure to be here at the Walker, such a hub for design here in Minneapolis, and always admire all the design work that comes out of this community and this institution. I'll walk you through a little bit of the process that we went through to come up with the logo, but first, to follow up on some of the stuff that we just saw, this was a quote that I came across recently that I kind of liked. We've certainly been congratulated for our work on the logo quite a bit in recent months, but I always say to people, it really wasn't a revolutionary design formally. It was the right design at the right time, and people have accused us of looking like other things and so forth. But what was revolutionary about it perhaps was the way in which people were able to use it to express their own passion for the candidate. And those examples are widespread and on some level are the most fantastic expressions of the logo. It also, coming from a corporate branding background, it was something that took me a little time to get used to, because we're so used to protecting logos from people manipulating them. But it became clear in political campaigns that in some ways you wanted just the opposite to be the case. So some additional examples that I've admired over the months and continued to collect. There were certainly a lot of cookies and cakes out there. I think this is actually an official adaptation of the logo, which Scott might speak to a little bit later, but the campaign did a wonderful job of rolling out variations of the logo for different demographics. Bibs. Some very well executed versions. Ad hoc. And the pumpkins, which are somewhat notorious. The Yes We Carve site was really a surprising and wonderful thing to see. And my personal favorite, which I still haven't tracked down the person who was responsible for this. But. And the mysterious author of the Beards for Obama you'll hear from shortly. This was, on some level, the most horrifying and the most wonderful example of this was the Logo Obama site, where people could upload their photos to sit in the center of the logo. So, but really a wonderful example of people wanting to put themselves in the middle of something like this. Of course, there were some David Hasselhoffs that ended up on the site, but there were a lot of real people in there as well. December 21st, 2006, a long time ago it seems like now, I got a call from a former classmate of mine from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, Steve Juris, and he was a creative director at a place called Mode, a motion design firm in Chicago that does some great work, and had a long-standing relationship with David Axelrod, had done some video and editorial work for him in the past, and Mr. Axelrod asked them if they could develop the identity for a campaign that looked like it was going to be getting off the ground soon, and they said they didn't usually do those types of things, but that they could bring in a partner. So Steve gave me a call, and I'm sure you designers in the audience will be envious to hear that all we really needed to do was send over a couple logos that we had done, and the job was ours. So we weren't competing for it or anything. So sometimes these things just end up in your lap, I suppose, and it was up to us to try to take advantage of that good luck and do a wonderful job for the candidate. We also looked at past campaign graphics, and I think I pulled some of your, certainly the Humphrey one was actually stood out a bit for something different. The Jackson was something that we certainly wanted to take a peek at, given that he was the most prominent African American candidate prior to Senator Obama's campaign. But all in all, we saw a lot of the same stars and stripes, and not a whole lot to admire or look back to. The one point of reference that the campaign gave us was Harold Washington's campaign for the mayor of Chicago. He was the first African-American mayor of Chicago, and I think actually quite an influential figure for President Obama. It just so happens that the sort of sun rays became a motif for the design that we developed as well. We didn't see this as something that stood out as all that different, but we appreciated the sentiment that the campaign was really charging with us with stepping out of the box, and that was really part of the requirement of the assignment. The other thing we did was we went to read both of the candidates' books immediately. We certainly knew about him. He was the senator just recently elected, really, of our state, but I had heard about him through various political circles and heard such wonderful things about him being an authentic person and someone who really was real about his aspirations and his beliefs and his commitment to his ideals and for the country. So we read these, and we began to think about what we wanted to do for an identity. When I look at identities and undergo projects, generally look to three criteria. One is that the logos tell a simple story that's an authentic expression of what's being represented, whether it's a product or an organization or, in this case, a candidate. It has to be a story that the stakeholders are comfortable telling. And it's not something that, as designers, we want to put them in the position of talking about geometry or typography or even really color. We want it to be a story that's much easier for them to tell and one that says the right thing. So that's perhaps the most important thing we look to. We also look to style. Every moment has its style. And we want it to be timeless, but we also know it has to be resonant in the moment, and that's something we're very conscious of. And then, of course, execution, which perhaps is the hardest thing, but in the end it has to be impeccably executed for it to really work the way it needs to. We look for the stories in the beginning. Sometimes we identify key platforms that we design against, but some of the ideas from the very start that we were alerted to were these. Certainly hope, change, and unity ended up being the three primary themes that we pursued, but these other ideas, authenticity, a dream realized, a new day rising, red states and blue states coming together, all of these were certainly themes that we were aware of from the start. Generally, we have a difficult enough time coming up with 3 to 5 logos, or 2 to 3 for that matter, that we feel comfortable presenting. And while not all of these were sort of finalists that even made it to the initial presentation, it was remarkable that we were able to produce as much as we could in such a short time. I think it was because we did understand what the candidate stood for very quickly and intuitively, and we understood what it meant. And we were passionate about the opportunity and the possibility that he might become president. Sometimes with corporations, we spend such a long time trying to understand what the main proposition is, that can tie us up for weeks with positioning. We didn't need to take that kind of time here. So actually, in a matter of days, we needed to develop some initial options. And so within 3 or 4 days, we were looking at a number of explorations across these platforms, one of which was unity. And we began to look at the way in which red and blue might come together, the way in which an O and an 8 might be formed out of explorations like that. We looked at other ways in which red and blue might come together with an O. This was an early example of how a symbol actually might come to stand for the campaign in a powerful way. An exclamation point, a theme that Minnesotans seem familiar with. Perhaps a little bit too much in the end, like an Olympic medal, but we have that on our mind as well in Chicago. Another kind of unity, some more abstract expression of unity that we were looking at. This actually came a bit later. We felt like maybe diversity was not a theme that we had picked up on strong enough, so we looked at the idea of people coming together and the negative space forming a star, which probably would have had to have been massaged a little bit more, but we went down this path. So unity was one theme, and then hope certainly was another from the start. And, hope could be represented abstractly here, something emerging from the distance, perhaps the idea of infinity, infinite possibilities, and certainly the B and the 8 continued to be a formal theme that we thought we might be able to take advantage of. We thought hope might be able to be expressed in the way in which the O might be a kind of a window to possibilities. And this was an exploration that really would have depended upon a campaign which might have used different photos to represent different ideas and different goals of the candidate, whether it be education, healthcare, or whatever the case might be. And also an expression of hope there. This was also an expression of hope, we felt. I mean, certainly the sun rising on the horizon meant that to us. This happened quite quickly. This was the first version of this. I mean, we had some sketches, which you guys might have seen quickly that I passed by in the beginning, but this actually matured very quickly, and we only changed it slightly in the end, which I can point out in a few slides. Change was the other theme that we looked to. So the need for change, the people calling for change, the voice of the people, that was something we looked at here. Maybe a little too close to talk for Chuck, for my taste, but this was a popular one that we discussed with the campaign. And maybe what was interesting about this one was that it actually crossed a number of these platforms. So it clearly meant hope. It symbolized change. One could say that unity was in there as well. So the strength of this one had to do with the multiplicity of stories that might be contained within it, but we also thought the clarity of the story that it told. And we'll come back to that. These were additional options just to show you that didn't really make the final cut, but other ways in which something might have been coming off the horizon there, a more traditional exploration here that perhaps evoked unity a little bit with the red and the blue, but was more of just a typographic expression. And we pushed the OB and the 08 probably too hard, but this was maybe one of the more elegant looks at it. So just a few days later, we did some internal refinements. We began to look at some variations in typography, how it might look on a bumper sticker, which is certainly a primary expression for any campaign. We looked at an adaptation of this that brought some more color into it. We were perhaps a little concerned about the red, white, and blue, and I do admire the Minnesotans' ability to elect candidates who go out on the ledge like that with color palettes and other edges that they go out on. But we thought perhaps that might be a risk for Senator Obama. We refined this one a little bit more. Just some typography here. We did actually present this one this was the initial presentation, I should say, to the campaign. This was the initial collection that was that was presented. Now, I think we favored this one early on, too, so we began to show some different lockups for it. And I'm sure a lot of you know that anything like this needs a variety of different relationships between the typography and the logo to give in this case, the campaign some options. But we try to constrain them, too, which didn't work all the time. But again, we were interested in this one. We were very interested from the start in how it might function as an independent symbol that perhaps at some point in the campaign would not require the candidate's name, which would be very unique and not something that we had seen in the history of campaign graphics. And this one, we began to look at different ways in which applications might feel in the real world. This got refined a little, again, looking at applications in the real world, trying to give the campaign an idea of how it might function. So the campaign zeroed in on 3 options, all of which we were, 3 or 4, all of which we were pretty happy with. I always thought this one was probably a little too sophisticated, but this was one of the finalists. And so, as one of the finalists, we began to show it across different applications. This also was a finalist, so blew it out a little bit. And this one, surprisingly, this was probably the runner-up, actually. And there was a lot of excitement about this. And perhaps, maybe it was really more out of the box, and I think the campaign was interested in pushing it. We felt, however, that we wanted to walk the line between something new, something that had never been seen before, but also something that could actually be expressed traditionally at the same time. And we did think it was a risk, perhaps, to go too far out of the box for the candidate. We knew that experience was going to be an issue. We knew that the right-wing radio hosts were constantly referring to him as Osama, so we knew that patriotism was going to be a kind of undercurrent that he was going to be attacked on some level for. So we felt that the red, white, and blue was not something that we should walk away from. And we liked that this was able to retain that while also strongly symbolizing something profoundly new. And again, these were just some different ways in which we felt it could be locked up with typography in the beginning and showing its application out there. And so that was the logo that the campaign went with. I'd like to think it was because we wanted them to. I probably really wasn't, but I think it obviously was a good choice. And one of the first things we did was a traditional sort of graphic suite for the campaign, some of which you've already seen, but we developed a small booklet and all the digital files that they needed for different executions of it. There was a huge cry for this logo almost immediately. Vendors all over the country wanted to get their hands on it. Printers who had a wide spectrum of abilities and graphic sophistication. So we tried to identify unacceptable usage for the logo, whether it was changing the color or rotating it or changing the typeface. These were all sort of classic do not do this signs. And again, it's interesting because in the end, like I said, the grassroots expression was one of the most powerful vehicles for the communication of the campaign's brand. But in the beginning, we were quite concerned about this. And it's, Scott will talk about this, but when his team took over, their ability to maintain consistency and to actually evolve the mark a little bit and police it to some degree in its official expression was a very important component of the official expression of the campaign. These were some early usages that we identified, whether it was white papers or buttons. So February 3rd was Springfield. That's where the candidate announced, and we were very excited and tuned in to CNN. But one of the first things I saw was that an awful crime against the logo, which we had not foreseen, which was that the vendor in this case had knocked out the center of the logo. So what we had felt was a symbol of the sun rising was now the dark star rising. And honestly did not hear a lot of that speech because I was on the phone almost immediately, beginning my weeks of driving various campaign operatives crazy. But there it again, it is. It was really horrifying. But nevertheless, we were pleased with the way in which the logo stood out against what became the primary competition. Interestingly, I didn't even realize until recently that Hillary's graphic identity did sort of directly harken back to Bill Clinton's campaign. Not in a particularly original way, but I thought that was interesting. I actually did not read the article about Optima, so that also, I find that somewhat, I'm surprised that they were able, that it evokes the Vietnam Memorial like that was a little bit surprising to me. But there were good expressions from the beginning of the logo, mediocre expressions of it. The 08 got changed to red. The hierarchy of the logo and the type got adjusted, various things that we were concerned about. Some really bad expressions of the logo, which, cropping it in that way. The gradient, going back to the question of style, we did develop a logo that had a kind of Web 2.0 dimensionality. And at the time, Web 2.0, perhaps we weren't all so sick of hearing about Web 2.0. And it was, I think it was a good move at the time. From a reproduction perspective, total nightmare. The only way that you could really guarantee the consistency of that gradient was online. So the simpler execution of the mark became, I think, the stronger variation. And so there you can see some people having trouble with it. So these are just some additional early examples. But we were involved until, I'd say about March or April of 2007. And then there was a gap where there were all sorts of additional crimes being committed against the logo. And at which point the campaign, whether through luck or foresight, brought on an incredible design team who immediately began to impact the overall brand expression and ensure the consistent expression of the logo. And that was Scott Thomas, who I'll turn it over to now.
First of all, it's really great to be here. The Walker has always been one of my favorite museums in North America, so it's an honor to be up on the stage. Let's say bye-bye to Helvetica for a while. See ya. So when we began, I started in September of 2007, and we were very uncertain of what we were about to embark on. It was myself and one other individual named John Slavic, who was my cohort. He was art director, I was design director. But it was a mystery as to how we were really going to accomplish this. And we knew that with this symbol that Soul created, that we could actually make people really proud to hold something. But to talk about my team just a little bit, it was mostly made up of fluffy pink unicorns that worked very diligently throughout the night. This is Click Through, our unicorn. He went to battle for us on election day. He has, at this stage in the game, he has this little mate conversion rate, which is right behind him, dressed up in Captain America garb. No, but that's John there with the unicorn on his back. I mean, we really had a tight team, and this really couldn't have happened without like one kind of taking it down to planet Earth and realizing that we were doing really important things to also have fun with it, and to make sure that we kind of kept the hope alive throughout the campaign. But John and I were brought in at this period in the campaign, which Sol just talked about, where they were using, I think, very typical kind of campaign graphics because they're doing it quickly. The thing with campaigns is that they're developing all of their logos and all of these banners and all this stuff incredibly fast at like a breakneck pace, in which most people in probably advertising would think, oh yeah, I work with tight deadlines. No, I mean, like, you have 2 hours to design this banner and send it to the printer because it has to be up in the middle of Iowa tomorrow. So get it done and get it done now. This ad hoc nature of design led to a lot of mistakes. I think very kind of traditional mistakes that graphic designers oftentimes see. Every kind of bad trick in the book is being used. So banners had beveled edges and drop shadows and reds on blues. People here are clapping for Barack, but they're not necessarily paying attention to the sign, I don't think, by any means. The website used 3,000 typefaces in its initial incarnation. It had every shade of blue known to man. It was, it was suffering from this kind of above-the-fold mentality, this notion that everything has to be on the home page and everything has to be a different color because it has to stand out. And that usually causes some kind of hierarchy problems, and your eye doesn't really know where to go. So John and I, when we were originally hired by Michael Slavey and Joe Rosbars, our position was within New Media. New Media was a part of the campaign. We sat directly next to the communications department, who we considered old media. And so there were these kind of battles between the two of us. But John and I were basically given the notion that one was going to focus on kind of print and branding, and the other was going to focus on the web. And we realized that that's not really how it's going to work, because both of us kind of could double dip, and some of us, we could either design websites or design print collateral. So we knew that we were going to have to kind of share the load, and in the load it was pretty immense. Right away we were having to do site maintenance, we were having to do email graphics, feature graphics, all these things, and they had to be done now, today. You don't have time to do brand standards, you don't have time to do user research. I know that sounds good and dandy, but you just can't do it because it has to get done right now. And that's a kind of brand new idea for us. We were used to working in ad agencies, and yeah, we worked on, we'd work quickly, but never this quickly. So we began to realize that our process was going to be a little backwards, and that we were going to have to build this airplane while it was in flight. If the wing's about to fall off, patch it with duct tape, get it done. It has to happen right now. And this was a notion that we were not necessarily comfortable with, but we knew that we would have to kind of suck up the idea that we were going to be able to perfect this right away, and that we were going to have to perfect it over time. We were going to have to gradually evolve the brand, gradually through doing feature graphics, change the blue gradient 3,000 times until it didn't look purple anymore, or so it didn't look too dark. But early on, we definitely created certain missions. Even though we didn't necessarily establish these missions in writing, I think they were kind of known between John and I as the only break that we had from the campaign was going out and smoking cigarettes. So we would probably do that 3 times a day and discuss, all right, here's what we should do. All right, we should do this. And one of those missions was to deliver clear and concise messaging focused on we rather than he. We knew that this campaign, and through Barack's message, it was not about Barack Obama. In fact, the campaign was about the people. It was about the people that were holding these signs. And all that messaging, and any time that we had an opportunity to design something, we tried to think about what we're saying. And that's important. We had to become copywriters to a certain degree. Even though we didn't necessarily write Change We Can Believe In, that was directly a strategy from David Plouffe, and that came down the chain. But there were always times where we had to kind of think about how do we focus this message on we rather than he. The second mission here was to keep this message of hope while dismantling the notion of being aloof. Barack Obama was a pretty amazing dude. And it was really great to work in that environment, but it's really hard to not make this guy seem aloof when shit like this is happening. This is, I mean, there's an end of a rainbow. That's where the politics is occurring, right there. This is the Harkin steak fry. This is not a Photoshop document. This actually occurred. How does that happen? But the beauty of this image is that it really communicates something. And you can take the word hope out of this, and it already communicates hope. The rainbow can communicate hope, and you can communicate this emotive quality of hope through design, through visual aesthetics. And so we knew we had to kind of capture the word hope and stick to that word change as much as possible. So that way we can have kind of one concise message. So we don't have people thinking we're, flopping back and forth, being a flip-flopper. The third mission was to pull from imagery of the past. That way we could really communicate the historic nature of this campaign. On the left is a linotype specimen book from the early 1900s, and on the right is the More Perfect Union speech. You can see certain stylistic similarities between the two. So by pulling from this imagery that exists online through all these archives, we're able to kind of use certain imagery that would maybe lend itself to saying that this is a really historic time without actually just coming out and saying this is a historic time. I have a couple other images here of this speech piece. This was delivered to me as a 14-page Word document, and I was told that I had to figure out a way to make this brochure at less than 10 cents per unit, because we were going to print a lot of them. That's a challenge. And yet you're dealing with this pretty historic document, so we wanted to fit the entire speech in this fold-out. So after 20 different kind of folding mock-ups and realizing that if we push the type back to being brown instead of black, it starts to and kind of like rough up the edges a little bit. It starts to feel like a historic piece. The final mission was to establish a consistency and balance to exemplify stability and experience. We knew that Barack was going to have this kind of Achilles heel. He was a junior senator from Illinois, and it was important to us to make sure that we looked as professional as possible within the campaign on all levels. And that meant that using the same typeface and using the same hues of blue and making sure that that was done iteratively over and over and over again, we would actually be able to, in some way, make this guy seem, really experienced and organized. And I think that was really accomplished. And in this image, the placards behind him as well as the podium sign in front of him all match his tie, which is a real benefit when you're trying to make everything sync up. So here's the logo as we originally got it. It was, as Sol talked about, we kind of felt that maybe the typography was a bit too soft. It made him seem a little too friendly, and to push that kind of sense of stability and experience, we used a modified version of Requiem. We kind of cut off the terminals because Requiem has really sharp terminals. We wouldn't want anyone to hurt themselves. We then centered the word mark under the logo, so that way it kind of always had this triangular composition. And then we had to do it all over again. So the brand that we ended up setting up, we realized that it wasn't just going to be this one brand. We were going to have kind of these different extensions. And in fact, if we could potentially hit right in the middle on all these different ideas, then we would be delivering, the piece that we thought would be communicating all these things. One, we wanted to show the campaign brand, which was the kind of, Obama blue, this radiant, kind of hopeful light. Lots of logos, simple typography locked up, Web 2.0, wet floor, all these things we knew over time you'd start seeing all over the place. The second part of the brand was the instant vintage. So by pulling from imagery of the past, we would use certain imagery that is already ingrained in the minds of American as being truly Americana. And the poster in the middle is a poster inspired off of a JFK poster. On the left-hand side, the typical, Uncle Sam, I want you to caucus. and Shepard Fairey's kind of social realism is all pulling from this this area of it already being vintage. It's already understood that this existed. And the timeless aspect of the brand was furthered by making Barack essentially seem already like he could be president to a certain degree. And this was one of my favorite brand extensions that we never really got to use, especially after the Great Seal debacle, when all of a sudden, my ears had to start ringing for about 2 days because we accidentally, we were asked to design kind of a presidential seal, which turned out to be not such a good thing on a slow news day. And just so that way we could really comfort ourselves being, designers who want to control a brand, we realized that there was going to be this whole other extension of the brand. The supporters were going to have their hand in it as well, and we should definitely support that in whatever way that we could. So we wanted to make sure any graphic assets that we created, we could put online. I didn't want to design every single t-shirt, and I didn't want to have to design every single flyer. It just would take forever. So by putting all these elements online, it really opened up the possibility that you, the people, could design whatever you wanted to. And that was something that we tried to embody in the campaign. But I don't think that the brand was necessarily where we made history this year. I think where we made history in this election was how we used media in order to communicate to people. We were able to activate people and get people more involved than ever before using technology. New media was made up of several different departments. MyBo was my.barackobama.com, which was managed by Chris Hughes, the co-founder of Facebook. And essentially it was the area in which, very different than Facebook, had to activate people and get people out and into the field, knocking on doors, making phone calls, creating events, fundraising. This was really the way that the grassroots were going to affect this campaign. It was incredibly important that everybody get involved. Social networks consisted of, if you could create an account on a website, I think we had one. Scott Goodstein organized our MySpace page, our Twitter account. These are things that had never really been done well by a political campaign before. Our video team really created this wonderful narrative, not only following Barack and showing all of the things that he had to say, but also showing the movement from the ground. So that way you could relate to the people that were also knocking on doors. You see some young person going out on a Saturday knocking on doors, and you might think, well, I could probably knock on some doors too. So video really did a great job of telling this narrative. Online ads was imperative to basically getting people to very specific parts of our site when we needed them to. It was incredibly underfunded department initially that we realized was incredibly beneficial to us. Our email team spammed you every single day. Stephen Gear and his team filled your inboxes basically delivering Barack and Michelle and David Pluff's messages to you. So that way you could be really informed as to what was going on in the campaign without to mention the donate button at the bottom. The states and people were the liaisons between the two desks. These were really the groups that made it possible for us to understand what was going on in the field and to hear the voice of the different constituency groups, so that way we might be able to adapt and make changes. Blog really told the story in an online narrative. Our analytics department was the true linebackers. They were the guys that were telling us the empirical evidence that we needed in order to make decisions. So if analytics could do an A/B test and say, well, does the blue button work better or does the red button work better? They could find out for us. And by knowing that, it allowed us to make really informed, conscious decisions. And of course, design is stuck in the corner. So this is where the website was at. Again, not the prettiest thing, but it was doing its job. And over time, we were basically asked to deliver this site in about 6 weeks. Pretty tight deadline. We were running up against Iowa, so in comparison to, I think, most web development projects, we were running towards the finish line, and we had to get there quickly. But what we really wanted to do, other than deliver, consistent typography, have color control, we really wanted to get rid of that kind of above the fold mentality, because everybody in that campaign wanted to be on the homepage. if you're writing a blog post or if you're having an event, you want to be on the homepage. So getting rid of that fold was imperative for us to deliver all the information that we needed to on the homepage. And we have this great column 3 that allowed us to kind of just throw any sort of little graphic that we needed to and make everyone happy. We were definitely a team of yes men. We wanted to say yes to everything. We wanted, if somebody created something, we wanted to say yes, we want to put that on the homepage because it's important. The National Voter Protection Center is important and it should be there. But if we were having to deal within the typical size of a web browser, we would be screwed. We wouldn't be able to actually deliver all that information. So it was incredibly important to us that we were able to kind of spread out a bit. It's important to also understand that we constantly evolved our website. You can see between this previous version and this next version, ooh, scrolly, come on. In this next version, you can see that it definitely changed a little bit. We were able to kind of tweak the color blue over time. We were able to create a full width feature graphic. We started realizing people were having a hard time getting into MyBo, but we were wasting a lot of space by asking people for an email address and zip code. So we had a project to break down the wall between www.barackobama.com and my.barackobama.com, which was this MyBo bar where people essentially in 3 clicks were logged right into MyBo, where they could then be a part of the community and make phone calls and activate themselves and activate others. The other great feature that we had on our site, which I think has never been done before, is we were able to stream every single event. Not the 30-second clip that you see on CNN of Barack talking. We could stream the entire full-length speech, whether it was Barack or Biden. We could show every single part of it. In fact, even the after the event handshaking for 20 minutes if we wanted to. So you were not getting an edited amount of that speech. If you were a supporter or you wanted to learn something about Barack's positions, you would get the whole unedited clip. But we still had a splash page. And as much as it seems like we are a really well-oiled, polished machine, we made mistakes. As you're evolving the site constantly, there are times where your text message window and your text mate window gets confused when you're programming, and you sometimes make mistakes where you're like, yeah, I'm on that. I'll update the delegate counter, and you hit send, and then it ends up on the website. Oops. We were doing it live. MyBo, when I started, was really pretty. And after it's slowly evolving, we didn't have access to the source code, so it's kind of this slow evolutionary process. But over time, a little bit of type control, a little bit of color control, we were able to make a really beautiful dashboard for my.barackobama.com. Of course, the communications department had its battles that it wanted to fight, that we had to deliver these sites quite quickly. We were always trying to figure out ways that we could involve people to kind of participate in saying, hey, they're saying this and they're doing this. And Fight the Smears was a good example of that. This was also a good example of developing a website in 24 hours. MySpace is interesting because if you know anything about web programming, you probably shouldn't develop it. It might be better to have an actual just designer that doesn't know programming to do it, because I played with it for way too long and gave up. YouTube, everything kind of looks the same. It's important that these sites all across all boards communicated the same thing. We felt that was incredibly important. We created a t-shirt competition so that way we could activate people. It was incredibly important to bring people into the process by making them participate. So even if you're a designer, design a t-shirt, upload it. And then by using the democratic process, determine which t-shirt we were gonna print. It was a good way to steal Threadless's idea and to use it for the campaign. Thanks, Threadless. Vote for Change was something that had never really been done before. The mission that I was given was that we were trying to register people online. We had to register a lot of people. We wanted to register people that have never been a part of this process before. And upon doing a little bit of research, I realized that there's no real good way to do this. And in fact, it's an incredibly complex, complicated problem. And it asks you way too many questions. My name is Simple Scott, so I figured, well, we'll call it Simple Vote. And we'll make the whole process really simple. And here's how we'll do it. And I made this, this is actually a keynote presentation I made 20 minutes before my meeting. This is a good example of how to work quickly. So I thought, well, we'll just say, what is your email address? Using common everyday language that anybody can relate to and understand. What is your name? Not to mention the fact that as we were doing this, some people would say, well, it's a really bad idea to have so many steps in a process, right? Like, after a while, people will stop participating. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is we didn't know which question we were going to ask you next until we knew the answer to the previous question. So if your birthday is showed that you were a college student, we probably want to know where you go to college. What school do you go to? Have you ever registered to vote? Very simple language. One question. Doesn't confuse anyone. What's your permanent address? What's your address at school? Ooh, now we know where they live and where they go to school. Now we can say, we're just going to search for them, and then, bam, we found them. Congratulations. It's going to be easy. Well, we're going to make this voter registration process cake. And it never works out like that. Things start getting really complex really quickly because you start realizing every single state has different rules, and certain states, certain counties have different rules. It turns into this really big circuit board mess. But we were able to accomplish it, and in fact, through a little bit of A/B testing, determined that people weren't responding as well to the Pretty Little Landscape one, but instead liked this, very Obama-ized version. And then that site also slowly evolved from being a voter registration site to being a find your polling location or early vote lookup in time. So this site essentially had 3 different iterations beyond its initial gestation. We also created an ad campaign, which most people haven't seen, and as there are probably a lot of designers in here, I wanted to show off some of the brilliant work that was created by so many wonderful illustrators. But these are real quotes, and we delivered real quotes from real people to illustrators in order to use their style of illustration to represent that quote. We thought that this would be a good way to kind of get away from the blue gradient and all of the Obama stuff, and maybe attract a little bit younger audience, and as well as maybe a more artistically sensitive audience. This is Cody Hudson's piece, Voting for a Stronger Dollar. Sam Brown from Exploding Dog. I'm voting because living with my parents is depressing. Aaron Michon. I registered because the economy sucks. This is a good example of design by committee, where somehow, some way, everyone started saying the word stinks is lame. We should be saying the word sucks, and so it got changed. But he had already done the illustration to make it so that way it represented stinks. We ended up changing it back to stinks, but that was a fun argument to have. I registered because the future won't run on oil. Brian Flynn. These are just really beautiful pieces. I'm voting because I'm tired of oil running our country. I'm voting because I make 2 gallons of gas an hour. I think there's also something beautiful to say about the idea of letting somebody run with their idea. And to a certain degree, it's hard when you're running like a political brand, or I think any brand, to kind of let go of your standards a bit, to break the rules every once in a while. There's no blue grading in this. All we have is the little tiny logo at the bottom, right? But what we were able to do now is attract a whole other audience, possibly. We were able to make people pay attention to it in maybe a different way. At this stage in the campaign, people might have been a little tired of seeing so much Obama stuff everywhere, right? So it's a good way to sometimes break rules and to think outside of the mold and to invite people to actually communicate what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Because really beautiful things happen from it. The idea kind of grows. This guy, I don't know whether he's voting or peeing, but it's still great. So we were able to get this accomplished, and as much as it is an honor to be up here, there's 15 other people within that design team that did amazing work and worked tirelessly in order to get this stuff done, worked passionately because we really wanted to change this country, and we wanted to involve people in a brand new way in politics. And I think that the true drive that all of us had really made wonderful miracles happen. So with that, thanks for listening. I'm working on a book right now which chronicles a lot of this great design work that was done by many different designers and illustrators inside the campaign, outside the campaign, from artists to Obama to vote for change. So be looking out for that. You can follow me on my Twitter page. I'm also part of the Post Family, as it was brought up earlier, thepostfamily.com, which is a blog. You can see maybe a couple aesthetic apparatus and Studio on Fire, two Minneapolis crews that we did a little studio tour of. Not to mention, we swap and sell some of our goods, collage, letterpress, different design work on our site. So check us out at thepostfamily.com. And thank you.
I've been told I need to separate these two. I'm sure you all have questions, so I'll just start it off with a couple of my own, and then I will turn it over to you. Just a quick bit on protocol. There will be Walker staff that have microphones that go down either of the side aisles. We would request that you use the microphone so that this can be picked up on the live webcast. But first, me. I'm just curious about a story that you told about the sort of Obama presidential seal, which reminded me of another scandal that wasn't, when Obama was giving a speech in front of a flag that had an O on it, and some of the right-wing pundits thought that was Obama's sort of, he was reinventing the American flag after. Yeah. I'm just curious, what if that caused hell for you, or if that was just sort of a blip?
Well, no, that was a total blip because that was actually a state flag.
Right.
It was like Ohio's state flag. So, unfortunately, the right-wing media wanted to latch on to that, but it was just kind of, sorry guys, you just don't know your state flags very well. So no, my ears didn't ring whatsoever after that. But definitely after the Obama seal, I had kind of a treacherous weekend.
I'm also curious about how, we all know that Howard Dean's Netroots surge in 2004, is that what it was? How that sort of changed online politics. I'm curious in terms of either print or web, how you, look into the future, how might the work that you did for this campaign sort of change how things, must be done in the future? What's the new starting point?
Well, just to elaborate a little bit on Howard Dean and his campaign, Joe Rosbars, who is the director of new media for the Obama campaign, worked on the Dean campaign. And essentially, they were building everything on the fly. They were having to build donation pages and all these kind of tools as they went along. And they realized that they could spend the next 4 years developing these online tools. So that way, in the next election, they would maybe be a little prepared a little better. And I think that really worked. And Joe's team was really brilliant. And they really set the bar for how to use social media and networking online for a political campaign. Now, where it goes in the next 4 years, in the next 8 years, I think in 4 years, obviously the Obama campaign is going to be very, very different. It's going to have a very different tone. But in terms of technology, I feel that politics is always this kind of Olympics for technology. It happens every 4 years, and everybody pulls out all the latest and greatest streaming video or whatever way we'll be communicating then is what people will have to use in 4 years. I think that the one thing that's really needing to change is the ability to kind of open up information, not only on the government side, but also just voter information and some of these things that were like huge tricks and major problems when trying to organize people and get people out to vote are things that could be so much simpler. So I think that there could be a major improvement in that area.
Yeah, I do think that there'll be, I mean, it'll be interesting to see in terms of the graphic expression, how much candidates in 2012 or even between now and then perceive design as a necessity, or, or a in-house design team as a necessity. I think to some degree that will change, but I also think that people's perception of that stuff varies so widely, and some people just don't see it, that they'll probably still be laggards. And I don't know, it's hard to know, but I think the bar was raised pretty high, and I think it will have an impact on future campaigns.
In 2007, in November 2007, Ward Sutton, the cartoonist, did a piece for the New York Times in which he critiqued all the candidates' logos. And this was back in the primaries when there was many more of them. And of the Obama logo, he said it looks like an O for Obama and also looks like sunrise over a field, or is it a zero and a sunset over a deserted highway? Too many type styles and colors, the look is left undefined. The designer may have been too inexperienced. So in the spirit of that,
wow.
You mentioned a couple things, the gradient, for example, a couple glitches on the website. But if you were to critique what you did, is there like one thing that you would do differently in retrospect?
Well, my mother was really upset about that piece, by the way. But I tried to prevent her from sending too many messages on the blogs.
Did she use a real name?
Yeah, I'm Saul's mom. But I think that I think we would have been more careful about defining where the gradient got used. I probably would have defined that perhaps purely as an expression for digital. I think that actually the moves that Scott and John made with the typeface made it a lot better. I think that the Perpetua that we used originally, in retrospect, I always felt a little uncomfortable with it, but...
Which one is that? That's the serif?
Yeah,
okay.
The original upper and lower case. So, those would probably be the two things that come to mind first. And then, I don't know what I would have done about those intervening months between when Scott came aboard and when we were kind of not involved. That's a tough one. I'm not sure what I could have done to prevent that. There was so much demand for the logo and people who weren't really willing to listen to why knocking out the center of it might be a bad idea. So.
We did so many things, and I think there would be so many things that I would probably do differently if I had it all over, to do all over again. But it's hard to kind of pinpoint one particular thing because it all was kind of like this super fast-paced environment. So there are so many slips and so many like mishaps and little tiny things, and we experimented a lot. And I think that it's an important takeaway is the notion that like you don't have to perfect things. It's okay to mess things up and to try things in different ways to see if they work. To use a different color in a particular example, as a particular example, it's okay to mess up. And I think that we definitely had to embrace that, and we had to realize that there were times where we created even a podium sign where we were like, man, the URL up there looks silly, but somebody asked us to do it. We'll put it up there, and over time, it just slowly like worked itself out. And I think that that's okay. I think that it's important for anybody that's managing a brand or that has, kind of corporate clients, to make them understand that even a presidential campaign, it has to evolve a little bit. And I think that that's probably a pretty important thing to leave with.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have any questions? Why don't we open it up? If you could wait for the mic, that'd be great.
Did Obama himself have any input on the identity?
We didn't present to him. We presented to David Axelrod, but I did hear that he saw the three finalists, and that what I heard was that he sort of said, "They all look great. Whatever you decide." But I can't say definitively if that was the case. So.
How would you approach 2012? Working with a 1 and a 2 instead of an 0 and an 8, and would you keep the logo? Or?
Does the sun end up, halfway up the horizon? I don't know. I mean, they're using it now for the Obama for America, which is
Organizing for America.
Organizing for America, which is, the campaign hasn't really ended. I'm sure you've all noticed in your email, and so it may be that they use the logo again in 2012. If I had to put money on it, I guess I think that they would. Because there's so much equity behind it at this point, but hard to say.
One up there.
You may have said this, but I may have missed it. When I think you put the circle around the image, was that also when it seemed the field, instead of straight lines, became the sort of perspectival curvy?
Yeah, I forgot to call out that moment. We did that. I mentioned it, but I didn't return to it. We got zero feedback on the logo, I should say. There were no requests for changes at all. But we felt, and actually, I should mention my team. I had a team of 5 on it in the beginning. In the end, the 2 designers that I worked with most closely were Amanda Gentry and Andy Keene. We felt that rotating the stripes gave it a more dynamic quality and allowed the viewer to sort of enter into the space more. I don't know if you're referring to the white circle around. That was kind of a separate issue that emerged first by sort of happenstance because the TV people wanted it in order for it to pop. And it kind of made us mad in the beginning, but then Scott's team kind of made it work by making some other subtle adjustments to the width of the lines. And stuff.
I mean, we had a lot of constraints that we were dealing with internally. One of the major ones being the fact that, I always think about this every time Saul does his presentation, because there's a lot of his ideas used color and 4-color. Most of the people, if you volunteered in a field office, realized that the thing that was running the campaign was a black and white laser jet. So having a color gradient logo was something that probably wasn't going to work out really well. So we had to make it 2-color, and we added a white stripe actually in between the blue area and the red area to kind of separate the 2 fields, so that way it works really well as a 2-color mark and a 1-color mark, because we were using, laser jets in order to print half of our materials. So we made slight alterations as time went on, as well as creating an even more 3-dimensional Web 2.0 kind of aesthetic for our website. And we did John worked very diligently on essentially creating brand extensions for all the different people groups. We had kind of adapted logos for every single state with an Obama O in it, or we had an adapted A that kind of looked like the Obama logo. So we did quite a few things with the logo in-house in order to kind of tweak it and just make sure that we were using it so much like it had to work for us. And we never received any sort of brand standards guide. That got lost somewhere in the 6 months that Sol handed that document over, and we started. We never saw any sort of brand standards, or we had an Illustrator file. I think that was all we were given.
In the beginning of the lecture, when you were mentioning about how people were playing around with the logo and the various interpretations and such, and the question about going after people for using logos and all that sort of thing, was there ever a user that distorted the logo so much that you had to go after them and say, "Hey, cut it out"?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, we didn't really police the logo. It wasn't a priority at the time, I guess I would say. I mean, the real priority was to, get voters registered or get voters interested in Barack or fundraise. So that's where our priorities were. So policing the logo is never an interest to us. We wanted people to use it in whatever way they felt they wanted to use it.
I imagine from a, intellectual property law perspective, once you open it up the way that the team did for download and allowed the variety of expressions, that people who used it for negative purposes, they were going to have a hard time with that anyway. And there were bad things that were done with the logo to criticize the candidate, but I think it was already out there way too much to try to reel that in.
Yeah.
How about one from this side, right there in the middle? Oh, you've got it.
Question
One step
on,
ahead of me.
With the Obama or Organizing America and the WhiteHouse.gov, are any of the people that were working on this campaign working on those designs? So that's one question. And then second, can you comment more on the process during the campaign when you had to design everything so quickly, and how the campaign communicated that, and how they made the best use of your knowledge, which they maybe
Sure.
wouldn't know about?
To answer your first question, I worked with a gentleman named Matt Ipcar and Macon Phillips, who went on to the transition team. The transition team was set up, and a couple months, after actually 1 month after the election, they started realizing, hey, no one's thinking about WhiteHouse.gov. We should probably do something. So Matt spearheaded a team, including myself and a couple other people, to do art direction and site architecture and navigation systems, and then an internal team within the transition team, because by that time I was spent. I mean, way beyond spent. I wasn't going to work another late night for a long time, and so I didn't go to DC, but there was a team in DC that was working very diligently, and I had the luxury of the day before the inauguration to go check out, what the team had done and how everything was looking, and everything was looking great. But, I could see it in all of their eyes, like, I've been doing this for way too long. And I was like, I know what that feeling's like. You guys are kicking ass. Keep doing it. So the transition team was set up, and now WhiteHouse.gov is run by the executive branch's new media team, which is headed by Macon Phillips, who was the deputy director of new media for the campaign. And several of the people that worked on the campaign within the new media department are currently residing at the executive branch in order to try and open this stuff up. The second question as to working really fast and working at the speed in which the campaign was running, it became kind of a well-oiled machine. And definitely at the beginning there was a little bit of latency as to, like, okay, we want you to do this, and of course there's that initial, like, I don't know if that's really what you want, right? So there was a little bit of trust building of having to basically create designs and say that, this is what you asked for, and here's how we think we can make it better. And so it was really, I think, using techniques that every designer should use. Do something that the client, or in this case that internal team, was asking for, and compare the two designs, and then explain why you think one design is better than the other. And and then there's all kinds of little tricks, like when somebody tells you, bump up that type, make sure you hit the up button twice and the down button once, and then make sure you tell them, hey, that you're right, that it looks so much better that now that type is bigger. I think it works.
I also think, to Scott's credit, I mean, I do think there's a bit of a crossroads right now in web design in particular. It's only been, 13, 14 years, but there's an old way of doing web design where, probably like 12 to 16 weeks was the minimum for site launch, and strategy and information architecture and design and development were all very distinct phases that were required to do a great job on a website. But there's a new generation of designers, including Scott, who are able to integrate technology and design, and actually our developers, they usually draw the line at some point in terms of how deep into development, but they integrate development and design and are able to work at that kind of speed more effectively. And I do think that's evolving right now still, and there's a bit of a tension there.
Yeah, it was incredibly important for the team that we built that people could wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different things at once. Somebody that could open up Photoshop, it would be great if they could also, open up a CSS document and know what was going on and make some changes on the fly. But I mean, the really great thing was the fact that with just a little bit of teaching people like basic HTML, team email, which was the email team, created a lot of landing pages, and just teaching them a little HTML as they went along, they started figuring it out. Giving them a couple websites, they were able to kind of create the pages on the fly. In fact, probably 90% of the pages on BarackObama.com, I probably looked at, but like I might have had no involvement in other than just creating the template. There's a real importance to teaching people how to use those tools.
I wanted to follow up with a question that answer sparked earlier. You had told me earlier about how Barack Obama had to sign essentially presidential orders of some sort in order to bypass or change the rules about how the President of the United States cannot use a third party to broadcast official communiques. I'm curious about that story, but also the larger issue of you helped this man win the presidency. How will what you did in the campaign change his governance?
Wow, that's a big question.
In 30 words or less.
Yeah,
maybe you could tweet it.
You can tell that you're a writer. That was like an assignment. I'd have to go back and like.
You want me to break it in?
Yeah. Maybe
just tell the YouTube story first.
Okay, all right. I'll start there. Essentially, from my knowledge, and early on in the once Barack was elected, the White House wasn't even allowed to use YouTube in order to broadcast video to the public because it was considered it was a web service that wasn't going to be contained within the White House, and that was something that the executive branch didn't allow. And so I know that the White House is working very hard, Macon's working very, very hard, and the team there to break down certain walls, to make sure that we can be a little bit more transparent in our government, and just make sure that the leaders that we have are able to be more transparent. And that's something where it's hard when you have such a sensitive office, an office of kind of, there's a lot of top secret stuff going on, and you don't want all that information out in the hands of everyone. So it's important to have, a certain filter, but it's also very important that the office of the president is able to communicate to the people and open that information up. In terms of the way that I feel that it's going to change his governance, I think it also changes the game in politics quite a bit, because the new internet generation doesn't really allow for politicians to lie anymore. One truth is that with the speed in which information is traveling, you can find something out about somebody quite quickly by doing a quick search. So if you say you get off of an airplane and there are bullets buzzing by, and somebody does a quick YouTube search to find out that that's not true, all of a sudden you lose a lot of loyalty and a lot of trust. And so it's important for politicians to realize the power of the digital space and the understanding that we all, at the touch of a button, can do the due diligence and do the research on our own.
Those are probably some of the most loaded questions I get about how does the logo affect, what the president's going to do. And I always say, the logo was nothing without Barack Obama.
Right.
I mean,
totally.
it was, singularly inspired by what his message and what he stood for, but what I would say is that, to the degree that a design sensibility and a recognition of the importance of design became an integral part of the campaign, perhaps design, I would ask, well, what can design sensibilities bring to society and to culture in a broader way? And, what might that mean for the way in which people communicate or politicians communicate with citizens, or how information is communicated when you look at financial derivatives or Social Security or things like that.
Yeah,
so
I'll take any like any tax form that you have to fill out and look at how it's designed. I mean, the level in which design can impact certain things is tremendous. And I think that as more organizations within the government start to kind of wrap their arms around designers and in some degree maybe listen to designers, that might be an interesting
You're supposed to
thing.
clap at that.
Yeah.
I guess what was sort of behind that for me was sort of a truth in advertising question in a way. You know, it's like if you campaign on transparency and having really simple URLs, and then you get into office and you have, you know, like you go to the IRS and try to quickly find a certain form, and it's going to be irs.gov/IID equals 217 or whatever. You know, it's like, I'm just curious. I mean, it seems like now what we're seeing is Barack Obama's coming up with recovery.gov. It's not whatever /recovery. So it does, I mean, I guess I'm answering my own question.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of evolution, right? And the thing to understand is that these are fairly small teams trying to solve really complex problems. And I think it's important that the administration develop sites kind of internally in the best way that they can in order to communicate what they're trying to do, because it's sometimes really hard to work through the bureaucracy of all these other departments that have, you know, a very firm foundation in what they've been doing for such a long time.
Mm-hmm. How about one more?
Yeah.
I have one here. Is this on? Thank you for having the site in Spanish.
Uh-huh.
Is it great?
Yeah.
Since we know the future is brown.
I'll have to pass that thanks to the translator who worked with me.
Yeah, great job on that. There was an AMA presentation this morning, and these numbers were thrown out, if you could confirm them. You had 7 million new profiles from the site. Because of the site, you registered 7 million new profiles.
Where did you get these numbers?
An AMA presentation this morning.
Okay.
And then 200,000 registered events and 30 million in donations. Would you say these were accurate?
I'm not a numbers guy. I'm a designer.
I know, but when you said that the whole purpose is to register voters.
Yeah, we did
I thought
register
you
a
might
lot.
have,
We
you know,
definitely
some of
registered
those
a lot of new
numbers.
voters, and one of the things that I was really looking at and focusing at in the time that Vote for Change launched was, by asking each question individually, we could notice when people were dropping from the website, and we could say that question's not being worded correctly because people are fleeing like mad. So we should probably reword that one question, and not to mention the fact that I was really interested in how fast people got through the process, because the idea that I had was that in 3 minutes you can answer all these questions, put a stamp on it, and be done with it, right? So I was much more concerned with like the efficiency in which people were getting through the process rather than the numbers. We did have a goal, and it was reached in terms of, I think you're probably right, it was something like 700,000 new registered voters up front. Okay, yeah. But anyway, I had an analytics team. They rocked. They gave me numbers. They fed me numbers, and then I forgot them. Another question? There's one up there, way up at the top.
No, just wait for the
if you
thing
can
so
just
you can
wait
get
for
it
the
to the web audience. Thanks.
There's all those people out there.
In America.
I'm very curious about the ownership of the addresses and the people who logged on. When Obama was a candidate, and those sites, as I understand it, were not Democratic Party sites, it was Obama's site, right? So when you got names of people, et cetera, and you own those URLs, if you will,
Right,
and now he becomes president,
right.
did you have to stop and create a whole new thing so that those didn't become property of the government or
This
the
is way beyond my
Democratic
domain.
Party?
I'm sorry. I honestly don't know.
Okay.
Isn't that why they created Organizing America? So they
Organizing for America was created to keep the base active, right? One of the things that we need to do, we have to stop with, like, we can't finish this election and stop being active people in our community. So Organizing for America was essentially established so that way we could use this large base and this momentum that we created during the campaign and continue it. And I know that Organizing for America is doing a pretty good job of activating people, and I think people are kind of, they're like, oh, we did this great thing, and we can just sit on our hands now. And I don't think that's necessarily the attitude we should have. But in terms of like who owns what, or like who owns the email addresses, if it's the DN, I don't know. That's not my interest. I have no idea.
My question is. Okay. My question is, how would you, just some thoughts on how you would see local candidates working in a much smaller microcosm and with much smaller budgets applying some of your concepts?
Well, simplicity is applied across the board from large organizations or small organizations. Simplifying a massive amount of information to deliver things clear and concisely, I think, can be adapted at any level of government. So I think that it's just important to make sure that when your message starts getting kind of too complex, or you're building websites and you don't even know how to use them, then you should take a step back and like figure out how to make it a little bit easier to use, and make sure that things are controlled. I'd say that it's definitely, there's a certain level of like making sure that you're keeping things consistent and keeping things honest and real.
I think there probably is a baseline functionality for websites that Scott and his team established, coming out of Joe Rosebar's and the Howard Dean stuff that probably should be assessed and activated by any serious candidate. I'm not sure I could tell you precisely what that architecture is, but it has to do certainly with relationship between donation and perhaps user profiles and web design standards as well. But yeah. I do think there's a baseline that almost any candidate should probably look to for web engagements at this point.
Yeah, I think that it's also important to look at analytics and then base a lot of your where you spend your time and what you do based off of numbers, right? So if there's so many people hitting this page, make sure you spend a lot of time on that page. Doing A/B testing and making web design less of an art and more of a science, I think, is important.
I don't know what the penetration is, though. I mean, I'd probably want to look at that depending on, what kind of demographics the candidate was speaking to. I'm not totally clear on what the penetration is for internet usage at this point. So, I mean, I say that about website, but that's probably, of course, something that you want to assess with your voter base as well.
Yeah. Couple more questions? How about somebody up in the front over here?
Hi. My understanding is for the website that you guys use the Drupal content management system?
No, we didn't.
You didn't? Okay. That makes this relevant.
Sorry, Drupal. There were actually a couple different content management systems all working together. We had Blue State Digital was the back end, so a lot of our blogs were being published through Blue State Digital. They had a CMS system, but all of our communications department was using Movable Type.
As a total type nerd, I was super excited to see Gotham. And I just wanted to hear about your thinking, why you decided to use that, and if it worked for you, and then it started showing up everywhere.
Yeah, I'm glad you're a type nerd. I am as well. The last time I was here was for Typeface, the film, which I'm a letterpress geek, so I love type as much as I love computer programming. It's bizarre. But the choice to Gotham, from Gill Sans to Gotham, was a pretty easy one to make. We kind of felt that there were some funny characters in Gotham. The terminal on the foot of the R kind of like wraps around. It almost seemed kind of a little too elegant.
Gill Sans.
Gill Sans.
Just as you said Gotham, I just.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what he said. I'm tired. But it made much more sense because it was fairly, it was. Gill Sans is European. We wanted something that was really American, and to have to have Gotham designed in America based off the Port Authority terminal, it just made a lot of sense. And I think the turning point was we were typesetting a feature graphic that said turning the page in Iraq, but the word Iraq kind of seemed like it could be put on a wedding invitation, which was a little odd. So it didn't really, communicate Iraq. So we needed something that was a little bit more stable. And obviously, we could have made Barack seem like the generic president and used Helvetica. But that would have been a pretty bad decision, I think. So Gotham was a very simple geometric typeface that we could lock up very easily. It has lots of weights. It was a beautiful face to work with, and yes, now it is appearing everywhere.
But what Scott isn't telling you is that the Secret Service came to him about Eric Gill. Because we had established Perpetua and Gill Sans as the typeface families, and the secrets of Eric Gill's past there was a concern about that.
Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding.
No, that didn't happen. But actually, one of our analytics guys got somehow, because I think just through osmosis and sitting so close to us, Alexander McCormick actually started learning a lot about typography, and he was the one that was like, wasn't Eric Gill a child molester? Thank you, Wikipedia. So.
Do we have any online questions? I know that someone's up there tweeting. No? Okay, hi to the online realm. Up here?
This is a purely frivolous question, but you guys saw so many, I'm sorry. Oh, this is a purely frivolous question, but you guys saw so many iterations of the logo, both good and bad. I'm just curious, what application that people did was your favorite?
Oh, you mean the grassroots ones? Well, aside from the Pirates for Obama, right?
That one's good.
I mean, just the way they just flipped that, and it worked so well. I love that.
Brilliant.
I mean, the pumpkins were really pretty charming when they came out. I'd have to think about it. I think, I guess I would say the pumpkins and maybe the crowds. I always liked those when people formed the logo out of, the different body colors and stuff. There was a guy in Spain that did this. Scott's going to have it in his book, I think, but did this huge Obama portrait. It was
gigantic, like the size of a football field. It's ridiculous, and they basically made this portrait out of different colors of gravel, and it's absolutely brilliant. But I don't know of a particular single logo adaptation. I kind of liked them all, and John did so many of them that were great from sports teams. But I always, as I was walking down the street, anytime I saw that Yeti shirt, I was always point and laugh. But I still have this problem of pointing at bumper stickers now and being like, ooh, there's a lot of them out there, but I still do it like a third grader.
We did resist the Obama mama stuff pretty heavily in the beginning. I don't know, so I still sort of hold a grudge against that.
Were you behind all those buttons? I don't think it was the official campaign, but it was crotch rocket riders for Obama, and there's all these different Star Wars fans. I don't know.
There were the official ones that Scott and John did that were the.
No, yeah, I know what he's talking about. And,
there really was one about crotch rockets.
There was, and that's a really long story that if we had a couple hours I could talk about, but I don't know. I don't know if I could do it. I don't have the patience.
Are we okay on time? Or should we wrap it up? One more?
One more
okay,
question?
How about one more from the floor? Anybody?
No one wants to ask the last question. We put it out there.
It's a Minnesota thing.
I guess two quick questions. One, I was curious how Shepard Fairey got brought into the fold.
Yeah.
And then the other one was, if you look at other campaigns like you had showed earlier, like Solid had showed the Hillary and the McCain campaign and what have you, obviously being entrenched in the Obama campaign, did you know or familiar with or have friends who were working on McCain and Hillary campaign, and could you compare?
Friends?
Well, maybe people whose work that you respected or didn't, but I was curious if the McCain and Hillary campaigns and other campaigns were a good example of bad management with clients that didn't listen to the design strategy versus Obama, who did, and kind of compare how the
Okay.
Obama
Yeah.
management.
Well, I think it's very basic. I think that one of the things that was beautiful about our campaign, which sometimes I forget to mention, is the fact that on every level it was truly a grassroots operation, meaning that David Plouffe was the campaign manager. And he was a great manager because what he was able to do is respect people that worked under him, empower those people, and include them in decision making. And when we were brought on as designers and we started to show that we could, design professional looking graphics, it was kind of understood. And there would be certain requests at certain times, but we were left to really do our job. Because I think that's the way it should work, right? If you're hiring really smart, bright people under you, they should be better than you at whatever they're doing. And that's really how the campaign worked on all levels. We really wanted to empower people. And I think that was he was by far the best campaign manager that's probably ever been in politics before, because there was no top-down approach. And when I say that, I truly mean that. And that's, I think, fairly miraculous. And I think that's what differs our campaign from the McCain and Hillary campaign. When things start going bad, obviously, like, claws come out and people start fighting and bickering and stuff. And we never really had that happen in our campaign. I make it sound like it was this really joyous place, but there were a lot of arguments. But truthfully, like a bottom-up approach, I think, is something that was great in that work environment. And to the first question, Shepard Fairey designed a progress poster, silkscreen limited edition that he sold on his website. He put his neck out there, and we reached out to Shep to do a couple illustrations for us. The first was for Artists for Obama. We just realized it would be great to invite all of the artists that we've respected over time and invite them to design a poster, and they're showing their support for Barack. So people like Scott Hansen, Answer Dial, several others became involved as well. Shep was, designed an illustration for us, and that we actually own the rights to the photograph for, because I guess maybe we're not thieves. We also knew that, it being a political campaign, we wouldn't want that to become a media story. And I think Shep has probably a different agenda. So yeah, I mean, he did a lot of great work for us, and it was really wonderful. I mean, we contacted him, I think, really late one night and asked him to do a more smiley Barack, and sent him a photo, and turned it around, I think, in like 2 days. So he worked very hard for the campaign, and I respect all of his work, as well as all the other artists that did illustrations for free.
Just another angle on your question. I didn't know anyone who worked on the McCain or Hillary stuff, but I actually, from just like the pure identity perspective, I don't think like McCain's was like the worst example in the world. I mean, his platform did have to do with his military experience, and the identity expressed that pretty clearly. I mean, it wasn't unique or groundbreaking or anything, but I think the way he rolled it out was some pretty awful stuff, and then he was just so, the awkwardness, and he just couldn't support any kind of, real cohesive brand expression. I think Hillary, looking back at it, we were impressed with the execution, not the identity per se, but like as soon as like they hit the ground running, like their signs were well executed, everything was like really buttoned up. And, but maybe the other side to that was like, from the identity perspective, like they took no risks at all. So there was kind of like this, I don't know, I feel like there's a kind of like don't rock the boat feeling to the identity. Yeah. I mean, certainly there's the first name usage was noteworthy for approachability and probably differentiating from Bill Clinton. But I guess I just wonder, when people ask me, is there ever going to, could there ever be a logo like this, or a candidate's going to have logos like this in the future? Generally, I say no, because this was like a candidate who comes around like, once every 100, 200 years? And that's the candidate, that's the type of candidate and the type of significance you need to do a logo of that power. I say that, however, that whoever the woman is who is the first woman president of the United States, might have an opportunity like that as well. I don't know, but I mean, that would be a moment of equal significance. So it will be interesting to see if anything could happen around that.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right, thank you very much. Well done.